Welcome to the Following Films podcast, where we explore the crossroads of film, literature, and everything in between. Today I'm joined by the incredible Paul Tremblay, acclaimed horror author of the Pallbearers Club and Cabin at the End of the World, the novel that became M. Night Shyamalan's Knock at the Cabin. And before we get into the rest of this, I know it's completely cliche, but this is definitely a shining example of when the novel or the book is so much better than the movie. If you haven't read it yet and you've seen the film, do yourself a favor and read Cabin at the End of the World. It's a pretty incredible book. And also, we talk about the Pallbearers Club quite a bit in this one, and that's probably my favorite book that Paul's written. It's a pretty fantastic read. In this episode, we're going to dive into his hauntingly brilliant work, his love of punk rock, and his involvement in the upcoming documentary series, First Word on Horror. But in a fun twist of fate, we chat about how he ended up with a t-shirt from a used bookstore in Tucson, the very one that happens to sponsor this show, Bookman's. For more on the First Word on Horror, be sure to visit etchstudio.substack.com. Strange coincidences, chilling stories, and a bit of punk rock. Let's get into it. Hey, Paul, how are you today?
Hey, Chris, nice to meet you. Love your t-shirt.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate that. How's your day going so far today?
It's going, yeah. This feels like speed dating, but it's been fun.
Well, I hope to make this as painless as possible.
Oh, no, it's been fun, yeah.
Just to get to, when I cracked open your books, one of the first things that I obviously noticed were some of the quotes. So whether it was Bad Religion or Bob Mould and these kinds of these little sprinkles throughout, or when I'm reading Pallbearers Club and the way you describe the jeans being pegged into the combat boot and these kinds of things, I felt so like I was being seen. That I'm 48 years old, so it's like we're pretty close in age, and it's nice to see my youth represented in a way that feels very honest. And I'm wondering if being a teacher for as long as you were, that helped you to write about youth and to sort of reconnect with yourself.
Yeah, it's a great question. I definitely think so. That I've honestly, except for 1 year, I've never left the student schedule. I get super excited when June rolls around, and then really depressed when September. And I think that's helped keep me in touch, with the emotional life of a teenager. And being around them obviously helps too. As I get older, I won't mention my age, but slightly older than you, not that much more. I lose physical memories, but I still feel like I've held on to what it feels like to be that age, or at least close enough to what it feels like being that age. Obviously it's rooted in the 90s, but So, thank you for the kind words for Pallbearers Club. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's that whole story is really about this. A lot of it is memory, and this idea that memory really, it's hard to tell what's real and what's just the story that you've told yourself over and over again, because you talk about it in First Word on Horror, where you have these memories that you feel like it's a memory, but you were way too young for this to have been a memory. And so sometimes when you repeat a story and you kind of just do that little tweak, because if you change just one detail, the punchline hits a little bit better as a storyteller. And so it's not that you're intentionally being dishonest, it's just something that I think you lose what the reality was. And it's this idea that I've struggled with for a long time of, what is my real memory and what is just me remembering the last time I told the story?
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. Like I've been long obsessed with that, the malleability of memory. And I was writing about it even before I recognized I was. I mean, by the time I hit Pallbearers Club, I sort of know, like, oh yeah, I'm obsessed with ambiguity and memory and identity and stuff like that. But to me, it just seems like an endless well, especially as a horror writer. Like, I don't want to do it with every book, but it's going to sneak in there somehow, even if it's not expressly an ambiguous story about memory, because I mean it informs our everyday, it informs who we are, and then and it's fun in a horror sense to think about, like, well, wait a minute, am I living a lie? Like, am I this weird monster? Like, obviously that's not the case, but it's fun to sort of like extrapolate and think in those terms.
Well, we have those little things that pop in the back of our mind, these ideas that we wrestle with from time to time. And it's not a thought or even an impulse or something, but we just start creating images. You sit down and you start writing a song, writing a story, anything like
Sure.
that. You start thinking, you put yourself in these places. So it's, what is that darkness that I'm wrestling with? And in fact, pretty, I'm pretty pragmatic in my thinking, where I tend to be kind of an atheist, but I'm open to ideas, I guess.
Yeah.
But when I read Cabin at the End of the World, it was 2020, and I just watched Frailty the night before when I was
Oh.
leaving. And so in my mind, these two stories are like in conversation with each other,
Mm.
because there's this thing that in my entertainment, I absolutely want the supernatural to exist. I long for it. But in my reality,
Right.
I tend to just reject that. And so your book is very much that ambiguous side that you could see, you could
Yeah.
project either one onto it. And I've sort of had this like crisis of anti-faith to some degree after watching it, where it's, why
Oh.
do I desperately want faith, and it's something that I'm not admitting to myself that I actually
Right.
want. So it was a really impactful book in that way, and I'm wondering if that was sort of the point of the ambiguity in that story.
Yeah. Well, first, again, thank you. I'm honored. No, I think it is, and I think it's wedded to, like, if you compare to when we grew up, we just weren't. We were saturated with media. Like,
Yeah.
the first sort of media revolution or pop culture revolution was cable TV, VCR tape, but now it's just sort of exponentialized with obviously the internet and social media. Um, and so, Cabin in a lot of ways is about like how every time you turn on the TV or look at your phone, it feels like the world is ending. So I wanted to sort of
Mm.
try to replicate that feeling, and then like tie that to fear, because our lizard brains automatically are going to jump to, oh, this is the end of everything, or there's something weird supernatural thing, even though, as you said, I would describe myself in a very similar manner as being a pragmatic, agnostic, etc. in
Yeah.
my waking time. But there's that 2% of the time where I wake up and have a terrible dream, or something like that. um yeah, no, so I wanted that for sure to be there. Because I think in horror, anytime you nudge up against ambiguity, it sort of, if not directly, but subconsciously gets to the readers the ultimate ambiguity that awaits us all, right? What happens when we die? Like, that's there. And some people really reacted negatively to that book, and I think it's partly because they don't like that ambiguous state, because I think that really bothers them.
Well,
It's not because the book is not good.
no, 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 no. Well, I think it's if you're having that powerful of a
Yeah,
reaction, they're that invested into those characters. I mean, it's the
yeah.
propulsion of that book up until the point where, I don't want to spoil something from how long ago, but
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah.
yeah, okay. So up until the point where Wen dies, there's this propulsion of that story that it is just, it's almost impossible to put the damn thing down up until that exact
Thank you.
moment.
Yeah.
And then you can kind of breathe in a way. And then from there, it's like, okay, you just put me through this gut wrenching thing. What are you doing with me? And so you're completely
Yeah.
fucking with me. And then in the end, it's up to you. And when I think about it, it's a lot of my other favorite films and pieces of entertainment that I love, like something like, I was looking at your Blue Sky, and it's The Thing. That's
Mm.
why that
Yes.
movie works so well, is because you go back to it and it's, is this the end of the world right now, or what is exactly happening in that exchange between these two men at that moment? And
Right.
because it's, the art stays the same, but I think you can revisit it every 10 years and you'll see a totally different, you'll have a different experience every time you do it. And it's, Cabin at the End of the World, I think that having kids, that's something that has definitely impacted the way that I read that book as they've gotten
Yeah.
older.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. No, and I think my actually opinion on the book has changed slightly a little bit too. Because when I wrote it, I tried to divorce myself from thinking, was there an apocalypse happening, or was there not? Like, I
Yeah.
really just didn't think there's like a true answer. And I honestly haven't thought beyond the last line of that book. Uh, Partly because of the movie. Now, I'm not saying this is the right answer, but I now believe there was no apocalypse happening. Partly that's maybe in reaction to seeing it so
Clear.
not ambiguous in the movie, anyway.
Well, no, I don't disagree with you. And
Yeah.
the point to me was sort of again, that crisis of faith. If this is what God had in store for us, well, fuck you then. It's kind of that's the feeling. It's like, then this to me, that's
Right.
the reaction of these two men walking off. It's like, if this is what God wanted from us, if to do this, you already took all this, why would we need to give anything else to this
Yes.
deity at that moment? So yeah,
Exactly.
to me, that's kind of the wrestling with that is
Right.
what it's really about. But
See, Goodreads, Christopher gets it.
well, one person. No, I think there's a reason that has
Yeah.
definitely caught on with people. But then, like, so with like Pallbearers, and you, or even, horror movie, you seem to enjoy almost writing exercises to some degree, but then they seem that way. But then it's the only way the story could have been told, I think. Like once I buy into the conceit and get into it, then it's just I start having this rhythm of,
Yeah.
reading the red writing in script and that kind of thing,
Right.
or going into the actual format of the screenplay that you kind of lose yourself in that and it starts changing the way you read it. Do you enjoy changing that sort of that writing exercise angle of it, or is it something you have an idea and that's the way that you
Yeah.
have to tell that story?
Hopefully both. I mean, I can't deny I'm a sucker for, postmodern techniques or different types of, narrative approaches. But the second thing has to be there. Like it has to be, in my mind, it has to be there. Otherwise, it's a lesser story for having it removed. Um,
Yeah.
so I had to, if I'm going to have a screenplay, ooh, that's kind of exciting, but it needs, I had, at least for me, I had to justify it has to be here for it to be in the story. I had a novelette I wrote once called Notes from the Dog Walkers, and it's told through notes left by someone walking my dog, essentially. But so I was like, oh, I have, because we got a dog walker for the first time, and the notes were weird and hilarious. It's like I have to write a story. But like, why? Like, why would I write a story this way? It took me 2 years to figure out the story that needed to have the dog walker's notes. And so, whether succeeds or not, like, which is fine. Like, if people think it doesn't, I mean, I guess no, that wasn't like a willy-nilly decision. It wasn't like, oh, I think this is cool, I'm going to put it in. I try to the best of my ability to make it, you know, not a component of the story, but like thematically linked. It has to sort of be there.
No, that makes perfect sense, and it feels deeply personal in that sense. And I think that while these experiences that you're writing about might not be your personal experiences, maybe thematically they could be.
Mm,
I'm assuming that these are not experiences you've gone through personally,
just
but
hope my
like
fingers.
the way that you write about the house in Pallbearers Club, I feel like I can visualize that house in a way that makes me think that this is the house you lived in at some
Yeah.
point in time. Is that the case, or is that something
Oh,
you're whole
yeah, and
cloth
that in
making
that
up?
book for sure.
Okay.
I mean, the first third of that book is heavily, heavily autobiographical, and then it
Okay.
sort of imagines an alternate path. But but that book in the Pallbearers Club, uh, I've used not that book, that the
The
house
house.
that I've used that in at least four or five other stories, it's the house in horror movie.
Oh.
It's the house in A Head Full of Ghosts
Oh, the
with
the
a
the,
little bit of
stair
a
the
difference.
stairway. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just keep going back to my house, which is weird. Well, maybe it's not weird because, uh, that was my first memory palace. Like you spend, as a young kid and as a younger teenager, I didn't really leave the house much. So like this was your world. So I just keep going back to it and finding that house both bigger and smaller than it was that I remember, if that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, that it's very strange when you go back and visit your childhood home, and it looks so much different than what you remember it. You build it up.
Yeah.
It's like I have these very vivid memories of the librarian in my elementary school and how huge she was, how tall she was, and how towering that desk was. And you go back to your school and you visit it
Right.
at some point, and you're like, oh, this is a 20 by 30 room. It's barely
Right.
even
No,
there.
super tiny. Yeah.
But I know we're right at about time here, but I was just wondering, when did you discover punk rock, and what does that mean to you? Because that's how I found a family outside my family, and I was
Yeah.
able to start fucking around and finding an identity for myself in a
Right.
way.
Um, So, well, for those that read the Pallbearers Club, it's actually later in timeline than in the book. Yeah. So
Yeah,
when I was in high school, I didn't have an older brother. I was very awkward, didn't have a lot of friends. So for me, music in high school was like, I mean, in middle school, it was Def Leppard and the Scorpions. So I liked, heavier
yeah,
quote unquote music. But in high school, I discovered Living Color. That was like a big deal to
sure.
me. I wore out the tape Vivid, but it wasn't until college. And college was where I felt like I totally changed. I felt more confident. I met friends that had similar interests. I became a DJ at the radio station. So it was there. I remember at the end of freshman year, I first heard Bob Mould screaming, and I was like, oh, what the hell is that? First, it was like recoiled, but then the more it played, I was like, what is that?
Yeah.
But yeah. So 18 going on 19 was when I first discovered it.
Well, and then for some reason, I don't know what's wrong with me as a teenager. It's kind of like, I think the same reason that I could watch Jaws when I was 11 years old and invest in
Yeah.
these middle-aged men hanging out, that I discovered sugar, and I actually
nice.
I got into Husker Du through sugar, through kind of a back door, I guess, to some degree. And so that, Copper Blue, that's probably one of the most important records in my life, I think.
Nice. Yeah,
Well,
it's a great one.
Last thing I got to ask you, so stupid to ask about social media, and I apologize for this, but
No
the
problem.
Book is Better shirt, is that from Tucson, Arizona? Is that Bookman's?
Yes, they gave it to me. Yes.
Bookman's is a sponsor of the show, so I saw that on there, and I'm like, the recycling
great.
is that Bookman's? So, okay, excellent.
Now, I got to go to the Tucson Festival of Books a couple of years ago at this point, and the movie was just out, and they gave me that shirt. So, yeah. No, thank you.
Fantastic. Okay. I wasn't sure if that was I could imagine people using something similar throughout the country, or if it was just an image you liked, but nice. Very cool. Awesome. Yeah. Well, Paul, it was great to meet you, man. Thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
All right, Stephen. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Take care, man. Bye-bye.
Time enough to figure you out. Time enough to write this down. Wish me luck, give me hope. voice crack.